So I suppose my end goal in my lifetime is that I want to see like an Australia where there is no disparity in life expectancy between Indigenous people and our non-Indigenous counterparts. I think 10 years difference in a developed country is just ridiculous by all means. And to also see the gap widening in a lot of areas as well is quite concerning. So addressing these short-term things is what I want to do. But in terms of realistics, it's probably going to take longer than that. But if I can start a movement in which we're getting more people educated in the sense that they can walk away from university or walk into employment that can better contribute to the issues that each community faces, because everywhere is different. But to do that, I think it also stems from education. So, involvement in organising ways in which our people can access that is something that I'll always be interested in. And it's going to take more than me to change this in the Pilbaras. And I'm certainly not going to be able to do it alone. So, yeah, building up the capacity in that workforce is something that's so vital to do. And again, it all starts from opportunity. So
yeah. Yarlalu Thomas, welcome to the Range Project. Steve and I are so excited to have you here. You're an old Scotch collegian, and you've gone on to do some amazing things and did some amazing things at Scotch, but we've been following your career for several years now. Loads of people at Scotch have. And so we're just so excited and privileged to be here with you today. So thank you very much for joining us for the podcast.
Hi, guys. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's an honor to come on, and I've listened to your podcast a few times now, and yeah, surprised you got to ask me to come along. So yeah, very happy to be here.
Oh, we're very lucky, mate. Yeah, we're very lucky.
So it's a shame you can't be here in the studio with us, but where are you now?
Yeah, so
looks
I'm
like you're at the
currently
beach.
based in, good backdrop, but I'm currently in Broome, hence Cable Beach as a background. I'm just currently doing my rural placement up here, so based at the hospital, studying medicine. So yeah, that's why I'm up in sunny Broome.
Very nice, mate. And how long are you up there for your placement?
Yeah, so this is a year-long elective in my second last year of med school, and it's something that students can apply for. And I got lucky in preferencing up here, and it's close enough to home near Port Hedland, where I'm from. But it offers, a lot of interesting medicine up this way as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. So is this far from where your community is, and could you give us a bit of a sense of where you are in relation to your community and your family and all that?
Yeah, it's funny. People ask me when I moved up here, and the best response is it's just down the road. And it is. It's 6 hours down the road. So it's much closer than the 20 plus hours I have to get to when I was living in Perth. So yeah, I come from a small community called Warralong, which is near Marble Bar, around 120 clicks, sort of southeast of Port Hedland. And yeah, my family all lived there, and I spent a bit of my childhood in there as well. So yeah, it's good to be close to home.
How long did you spend growing up there?
Yeah, I spent a few of my younger years in the community. And then I got to travel around with mum with the work that she did. And she was a native title lawyer. And so that involved moving around from, this little community of 100 people to Jarrow, Broome, Port Hedland. And then I spent time over in Queensland, in Cairns, and in the Gulf of Carpentaria.
Were you doing that?
So I think, fun fact about me is I went to about, I think it was 8 or 9 different schools before I settled down in high school in Perth. So yeah, it's just something I was just used to, just packing up and following.
Was that unusual for like people from your community to travel that much, or were you quite unique in that respect?
No, a lot of I think Indigenous families know the idea of traveling around, and it's just a very common thing. Just go where opportunities take you. And I think it was pretty opening. I think an eye-opening thing for the community was me going down to Perth for schooling, and that was something that they were very impressed by.
Can I ask, so you're doing this placement at the moment. What are the kind of things you're getting to see as far as the medicine? What's the focus there, and what's really been interesting in that regard in terms of the health and the medicine stuff that you're looking at the moment?
Yeah, so one of my sort of key interests in medicine is obviously Indigenous health, and then improving the state of Indigenous health that it is at the moment around Australia, but particularly in the Pilbara. And I think I really wanted to come to the Kimberley just in terms of the research that's coming out in this area, and some of the protocols that they have, which has never been implemented anywhere else in Australia. I think they're quite sort of nation leading in that regard. And I think, yeah, just being here for only 3 to 4 months, it is noticeable compared to at home. And I think there's a lot of learnings that I can take just personally as you know, Indigenous doctor. And there are a lot of Indigenous doctors that have graduated before me. And so spending time around them as mentors, it is such a great place to learn, and also learn interesting medicine that's sort of, you know, isolated to tropical areas and tropical medicine. So things like rheumatic fever, which you'd never see in metropolitan areas or rarely see, whereas, you know, such a endemic up here and such a big issue. It's just great to have that during my studies and have that exposure.
Oh. Is that what is that cause deafness? Am I correct there? The rheumatic fever?
So the rheumatic fever leads to the rheumatic heart disease, in which you sort of have issues with the valves, and they often become infected. And it's something caused by a bug that's associated with overcrowded living conditions. And so this is something that I saw a lot over in when I lived in the Gulf of Carpentaria as well. And I'm not sure if you people watched I think it was the Four Corners episode that came out with rheumatic diseases in Indigenous communities. So it's been something that I've sort of noticed in the background growing up, and, you know, diving into the medicine side of things is just a great thing to do this year.
Yeah, well, we've got a lot to talk to you about what you're currently doing now, but I wanted to talk to you about what inspired you to get into that, and at what stage did you know, consider moving towards medicine? How was your upbringing? I've heard you talk about some, you know, seeing some diseases that you would see in that community, but you wouldn't see elsewhere, and that was a little bit eye-opening for you, and things that you saw people dying, you were going to, you know, many funerals and things like that. What was it? Did that kind of contribute towards your decision to go into medicine?
Yeah, 100%. I think it wasn't until I got to around year 10 where I sort of realized that I wasn't gonna you know, fulfill my dreams of being an AFL footballer. And so I thought, you know, what else should I do? And I started thinking about it. And I think it was that summer trip home when I was from year 10 to year 11. I sort of noticed it a bit more, and you get to that age where you pick up on these things. But, you know, it was just simple things like diabetes and the prevalence of that in my community and in my, you know, immediate family compared to those of my peers that I went to school with. But other things like renal disease, and yeah, like you said, with going to funerals, it was just so often that I'd often have to miss school to go back home and attend funerals and say goodbye to loved ones. And I think it was a big sacrifice for not only me, but, you know, every other Indigenous kid that goes down for schooling in Perth or away from home.
And did your friends understand that, or was it too big a difference for them to really grasp?
Yeah, I mean, that was like the most interesting thing about you know, Scotch, and it just felt like, you know, a lot of the time, like being a minority in that sense, not only being, you know, Indigenous, but having this whole issues that I have to put up with at home, is, you know, saying goodbye to family and being away from them for so long, not having the opportunity to say goodbye. It was a bit eye-opening, and I don't think, you know, when I did, you know, have my lows during school, like, it's something that I think a lot of boys didn't recognize or understand and could appreciate. But, you know, we did have a good community with the Indigenous boys that did go to school. And I think, you know, having that brotherhood essentially was just what really helped us get through those tough times.
Can I ask, when you, like, if we jump back to your Scotch days, what are your kind of fondest memories from Scotch in terms of, and we can get onto maybe some of the things that you found challenging, but when you look back on those moments of Scotch, what are the things that stand out to you as as sort of, I guess, powerful moments for you learning wise?
Yeah, I guess learning wise was, first rocking up and realizing that I had to get pulled out of every single class and put in the more focused groups, and that I wasn't quite at the mainstream level. So having extra tutoring sort of every day after school made me realize, just how far behind I was off the mark. And, something that I guess, mum hinted to me and dad hinted to me is, this is an opportunity for you to get not just a good education, but a world-class education. So in that sense, it was just, I guess, an important thing for me to keep that in the back of my mind going through the years of school, just making sure I was ticking along. But it wasn't until, the 11 year 12, I applied myself and decided, I want to get good marks and get to where I want to be afterwards.
There are kind of two ways people can go in that situation. They can go, this is too hard. I've got too much to catch up on and I'm going to give up and not bother. Why did you kind of take the opposite approach?
I think it has to do a lot with the people who you're supported by and who you choose to support you. I think,
and who was that for you?
Times,
was that your family?
Yeah, it was my family, and in particular my mum. There's just so many times where, I'd get frustrated. I would never make it over the mark, never hit my goal. And she always told me, it's a marathon going through school, and it doesn't matter if you stumble over those hurdles. If you keep your eyes up looking for the finish line, you're going to get there. And I think, it's being, persistency is key, and making sure, not getting down on yourself if something doesn't go your way that one time. It's just about how you respond to that and how you bounce back.
Is there anything, like, on reflection, is there anything that you would think schools would need to do differently? Looking back now, what could be done better, perhaps, that wasn't done when you were going through school to make life a bit easier for your boys like you when you arrived here on a scholarship, and it was this massive culture shock. Have you sort of reflected on what we could do better here at Scotch?
Yeah, I think a few things that I sort of noticed when I was going through as an Indigenous boy and wanting to study medicine is that I didn't really have someone to look up to and a mentor who wasn't in young Indigenous male, perhaps going through medical school or a doctor. So a lot of the times I just felt like I was in my own boat. And that's something I've noticed a lot more, especially with other PSA schools as well as Scotch, is the increased level of mentorship that goes on. And just to show, other kids that you're not the first person to go through and do this, and you've got support in people who've had that lived experience. And so, I try to get back to Scotch as often as I can. I took a gap year between my studies and did a bit of a stint at the boarding house, which was great to, get back on the grounds and do a bit of tutoring and mentorship with the boys that have now I've seen graduate. So, it's awesome to see that, and just makes me so happy to see.
Can I just ask, did you? I'm not sure if you remember, but there was an assembly where you received leadership honours, and I was chatting to a colleague about it a couple of hours ago, Cara Fugel, who's our Director of Teaching and Learning here now, and she just said it was one of the greatest sort of experiences she's ever seen at an assembly, because there was the longest standing ovation she's ever seen for a student, and it was just, the boys were so pumped, I think, for all the things that they heard, read out on your transcript, all the things you'd done at the school. What was that feeling like? Was that a great sort of end to school for you?
Yeah, it was pretty overwhelming because that was the year, and I think the year before that, I sort of introduced a few events at Scotch. One of them being the inaugural Indigenous jumper for Indigenous round during AFL season, and being the first PSA school to create a jumper. And then also sort of celebrating Indigenous cultures through NAIDOC Week and ramping that up in terms of having an event where we sort of combined with the other PSA schools to celebrate and share what our culture means to us. But like you said, like I got up there and the last thing I was expecting in terms of my whole cohort standing up and applauding me, and I think that just reflects a lot of the attitude of the boys around me more than myself, and just how supportive they were in terms of what I was doing. And and the way in which they, responded to that just made me feel so happy at the time.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Absolutely beautiful thing. So,
and did you always, this is a bit of a controversial question, but did you always feel supported, or did you have some really tricky times?
Yeah, look, there were always some times, I think every Indigenous person can say this, that there is sometimes conflict and people who have interesting attitudes towards Indigenous culture. But I think the main thing is for us is to hold our, head up high in terms of where we come from, who we are.
What age were you when you first experienced that kind of thing?
I noticed it a fair bit. I think when I was playing a bit of footy around the place, and I think it's just a community level where, racial vilification went on the field. It happened a bit that was sort of not overt racism, but, hinted at it during school as well. And I think a lot has to do with the response for Indigenous people as well, in terms of ways in which you can educate that person in a non-confrontational way. And yeah, there's a lot of boys who I look back at school and I remember them and thinking, wow, you've changed so much since the first day I was in year 8, and the way you respect me and my people when I graduated. So I think it's like a two-way path in terms of that. And it's just something that I know a lot of Indigenous people shouldn't have to put up with, but it's something that we just deal with day to day.
And did you talk to anyone about it when these things happened? What was your method of understanding it?
I think, in terms of going to an all-boys school, the level of testosterone that's filled around the place, and the moods that you go through as a young teenage boy, is very easy to resort to violence as your option. And, I've seen that happen a few times, but I just thought, seeing that and just reflecting on that, what's a different way you can go about it? And I think, having those chats with people, you can really change a whole lot. And yeah, I think it just comes from a lot in terms of me being proud of myself and who I am more than anything. And I just keep that, close to my heart. And when dealing with these matters, it's just some sort of reflection on, where I've come from, who I am, and what this means for, my family. But yeah, I guess it was just more of a self-reflection, and thinking before you act was the main message there.
So Yarlalu, just to pivot a little bit to sort of some bigger kind of political themes now, given it's Reconciliation Week and the theme is Be Brave, Make Change. There's a lot going on here at Scotch at the moment with Reconciliation Week, and I'm just wondering what does this mean to you? And I guess the second question is this, the Labor government getting in and this whole commitment now to the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and do you feel like there's a real shift, seismic shift going on, politically, or what's your view on that?
Yeah, so few things that dissect from that. I think the theme this year, in terms of being brave and making change, I guess that can happen at all levels, and it's something that I think Indigenous people do most of the time these days with Reconciliation Week, which is showing off your culture, being proud of who you are and what you do. But the other part, I think, from non-Indigenous people is just having that conversation and showing genuine interest in what Reconciliation Week is about and what it means to be living in a country with the oldest living culture in the world. I think it reflects both nationally but locally, in the sense that I think reading up on whose country you are on, and the significance of the history of that area. And one example is at school, the design I made was in reflection of Lake Claremont, which was Galbo Manup. And I think that was the one thing that a lot of the boys learnt when I got up on stage and spoke about the meaning of the design. And, then hearing people come up after me and asking questions is just, that's the being brave sense right there. And yeah, in terms of making change, I guess the second part of that, we're looking at, recent statements from federal government with Uluru, the Uluru Statement. I think, a lot needs to be done in terms of closing the gap, and my interest specifically being in the medical world, but also education. Yeah, I am. I am a supporter of the initiative in terms of having a voice from community be expressed in Parliament. And I think, just even having this discussion is just taking this right steps forward in our society. Next part of that, if we get to the referendum and how that goes, that's for Australia to decide. But a lot of my focus is also stemmed around being the medical aspect, in terms of the fact that policy changes does take a lot of time, and it's time that me and my family can't wait for. And so, we sit here waiting. More and more of my family being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, renal disease, rheumatic heart disease. And a lot of this stuff is just preventative. And so for me, I think the short-term goals also include ways in which we can empower Indigenous communities and create future Indigenous leaders who can also voice the concerns of their communities. So a lot of stuff I do around with Medala, which is a scholarship company that sends kids to get education down in Perth and other areas. I think it's just so vital to continue that. And like I said, develop them into young people that they can bring something back to their community. And I think for that, it's just like this word and phrase that my dad told me, and which I do, which is that kujiragari, which means walking in two worlds. And it's just living in a society where you are able to participate and be involved in modernized society, but also be strong with your roots, with who you are, what you are, your language, and your old people.
That takes some real strength, though, doesn't it, to walk that line, to balance those things, I imagine, to just kind of go into very different cultural environments when you get back to your community. And I imagine that does it take time for you to, if you've been spending heaps of time in the city, or when you get home, are you just like, great, like you just feel straight at home?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that gets me when I go home is the heat, and I just tend to find myself on the couch for 3 days just because I can't stand it compared to the Perth climate. But I guess one thing that I've noticed is it's almost a skill in itself, being able to act appropriately in communities, and the way you would act there is very different to going to school in Perth. And a few examples, it's just talking to your elders, or say example, your teachers, when you go to shake their hand and introduce yourself. Back at home, if you look in their eye, it's considered to be rude. Whereas, in Western society, it's a lot to do with making eye contact and a firm grasp, which is those polar opposite things. It's little things like that to completely different languages. And I think it's something that a lot of boys have to learn by themselves and with each other, in terms of that code switch. And it's just about knowing, that there's ways in which we act at home, which is completely different to in the classroom or anywhere in Perth.
Do you think there's a responsibility, if you're a non-Indigenous person who, to be able to code switch yourself as well in Perth, right?
I made the mistake. When I first became a teacher, I had this issue, and I was telling Indigenous boy off, and I was like, "Look at me while I'm talking to you," and then obviously that was the
complete wrong thing to do.
I know, but I just didn't know, and it's just education and understanding, isn't it? On both sides.
Exactly. And it takes two to walk that side of thing as well, in terms of the issues that you have to deal with. So I think like having sort of cultural competency programs, which we've seen a lot more of, I've noticed around workplaces, for people to know that these things exist. It's certainly like a positive reflection, I think, in these past few years that I've noticed.
Yeah, traveling, I think for anyone traveling between multiple worlds or multiple cultures is where you start to understand that there is another way of living other than your own. And so, for you've traveled all around. You come to Perth after traveling many different places, and you understand that people act differently in different ways, but there's probably a lot of people that you were interacting with that had never left their little neighborhood. it's really hard for
Yeah.
them, I guess, to understand that there are different ways. You send someone to Japan, for example, and there's a total different culture there. It's just it's very foreign.
Yeah, because funny that you mentioned that, because I think like in terms of the boys that I saw made the most progress at Scotch in terms of being open about the idea that there's a life that exists outside of the suburbs that they live in, were the ones that went on those Tanzania trips to Africa and got a sense of what the world is like outside of the comfort zones. And yeah, this is something I think I'd love to see in terms of, Scotch boys or anyone at school for that matter. It's just experiencing and being open to, what other lives are like outside of your hometown. And I guess for me, it was a lot easier, like with my background, like I said before, just traveling to a different town every year is something that I just had to get used to and to fit into where I was.
Before we move too far away from it, you were talking about, you had some really good suggestions about closing the gap that wasn't not just related to your role in medicine, but also in education and community leaders and all that kind of thing. What are the biggest things that are holding that gap open?
I think honestly, the main thing that I see at home is just access to education. I'm the first in my community to get a high school certificate, let alone go to uni. And since my time of graduating, what's that been, 5 years? It's I've seen a few cousins go through the Scotch program and follow my footsteps, which was so amazing to see. But in that sense, there's only 3 that did it out of a possible of 100 kids. And so I think increasing not only the opportunities, but accessibility to getting an education. And I think in an ideal world for me,
that to occur?
Yeah. So in my ideal world, I think that having the facilities of getting that world-class education back on country is the main thing for Indigenous people in remote areas. And I have discussions with family at home and situating it in one town in which you can have elders' involvement, have structured curriculum that surrounds getting those opportunities to do what you want to do when you graduate, but to also learn your culture, be able to go back on country, and having that connection to language is just what's going to further empower young people to being great leaders one day.
Wow. So yeah, fantastic. So to have much more government spending to ramp up schools out in more remote settings and rural and remote settings, basically.
Well, it's easier to talk to people in remote. I mean, we're talking to you from quite a long way away. Has technology helped this since, it's really, I guess, COVID times, we're all getting a lot more used to doing things online. Have you noticed any kind of changes with education in the last couple of years?
Not a whole lot, because there's also the underlying factor that, to do your homework and to have, access to technologies, you got to have it in the first place. And so if you had a home where you don't have internet reception, or a computer for that matter, there's a lot of other issues that play into that as to why that wouldn't work. But yeah, I think, having the quality of teachers as well is another factor that would help change things. And I noticed that when I first got to Scotch, it's just how much of a difference that does make. And they are there to also mentor you in what you want to do and where you want to be. And I think, if there's a way in which we can get more teachers who are so, involved with reconciliation, I think it would involve them, going up and working with kids as well.
Now, mate, I just wanted to pivot a little bit now and just get back to some of the work you're doing in the field of medicine and health. And there's this Pilbara Faces project that you've been involved with. Could you tell us a bit about that? Because that sounds amazing.
Yeah. So I sort of got introduced to that project in 2018 when I came back from Sydney after doing my undergraduate degree there. It started off with me getting a bit homesick, being in New South Wales. So came back, wanted to take a bit of time away from study, but also be in the health area, and was just looking up online some interesting health projects in the Pilbara, and this one caught my eye, in the sense that genetics is a very niche area, but it's also an exciting area in health in terms of the genomics and technology that surrounds it going forward. So yeah, I messaged Gareth Bainham, who's my boss and mentor today. And yeah, the project sort of surrounds me being a community liaison to go back and capture 3D facial imagery. And the purposes of these 3D photos is that it enables doctors like Gareth, who's a geneticist by trade, to diagnose children living with rare genetic diseases. So the fun facts that we like to say with this is that of rare genetic diseases and the children that suffer from rare genetic diseases in WA, you have about 60,000 there, give or take. So that's enough to fill a whole stadium, like Optus Stadium, of West Coast or Freo supporters. So you take that into consideration. The other issue is if we wanted to do that realistically, we could probably only get half of them to the stadium, just in terms of accessibility to get a diagnosis for people with rare genetic diseases. For that accessibility to healthcare, Aboriginal people, and we see this is more profound with children that live with these rare and genetic diseases. It's just so hard to be put in the right system, to see the right doctors and see the right specialists about what they're living with. And so this is just a way in which we can fast track that process of families getting a diagnosis. It's a way in which it can be non-invasive at times, so avoid skipping the blood test and just going straight to the camera. I know that every family or every mum and dad would prefer that option rather than a screaming child.
So is that the main advantage? Just it's invasive. Is there other? Can you do other ways of getting genetic information? DNA tests has to be blood, or is it like swabs or?
Yeah, so that's the genomics parts in terms of reading, the DNA and molecular structures of our body. But there are subtle clues that you can see in these kids in what we call their phenotype, so what they look like. So an example that we use is you can notice someone with the features of Down syndrome, and that's the same for about 4,000 to 6,000 other diseases.
And fetal alcohol syndrome is another quite big one. Is it just proportions of the face? Is that mainly what it looks at?
Yeah, so there's the proportions of the faces, and FASD in particular is often a barrier for these children in receiving the right diagnosis. In many cases, they are labelled as FASD. In many cases, they don't actually have the diagnosis, and they've been misdiagnosed as a result. They get the improper treatment, and there's also a lot of burden on the mother and family who have been labelled as people who drink during their pregnancy. So it works, I think, more in that line as well. And in terms of accessibility, it offers a way in which we can diagnose children in the Red Sands up here from the local clinic, and saves costs on funding in terms of flying them down to Perth to see the specialist.
So how's the data analysed? Is it AI or is it done by individuals looking at the scans?
Yeah. So we've got some really an amazing team.
I was going to say sometimes you have to actually plot points on it. Have you been part of that process, or are you?
Yeah. So the old school way was you'd try to get a kid, any kid, try to sit down on the mum's lap and try and measure parts of their face. It's just a near impossible task. And that's what was the objective way of doing things previously. And often doctors would give up and just, not get an actual recording, but just assume that they might have, a slightly widened eye space, for example. And so this offers a way in which we can take objective measurements and actually use data that's, factual rather than that subjective evidence. And then in terms of AI, it does offer an amazing complex way in which we code these phenotypes or these terms or these features of that these kids have, and these subtle facial clues. And fancy algorithms have been generated these days where you can plug in, the kid might have those widened eyes as well as A, B, C, D, E other features. And it can suggest ways in which you can go forward in terms of, that's definitely a diagnosis, or how about no, there's 3 that are likely, but we're still not sure, we'll go forward with a blood test. So it just helps streamlines treatment pathways going forward.
So how good's the correlation going at the moment? Have you streamlined it down to what kind of level of accuracy are you being able to determine these diseases based on these features?
Yeah, so it is a pretty accurate way in terms of measurement, and it's more accurate than going through that subjective way. It's still in the process of being developed, and in terms of the actual numbers, I'm not too sure. But one thing that I noticed when I first got there is that to have a way in which you can compare a subpopulation group to its population is that you need that reference range. So previously, for the data we were using African American faces for Aboriginal faces, and that was the only thing that you could use.
So you just need more data.
Available. So more data. We need about 1,000 photos of Aboriginal faces to put together before we start to see some positive benefit from it. And at the moment, we're sitting around 500 mark. So yeah, I'm hoping while I'm up here, get that done, and hopefully start to use these and implement these in clinics around the Pilbara and Kimberley.
So how does this program? Is it part of? Is it a PhD you're doing, or is it just part of?
Yeah, so this is separate to. I don't actually do the research with the facial analysis; just too complex for me. But there's a team called down at Cliniface, which is based in Curtin University, and we've got some really smart guys, such as Richard Palmer on that project, who do all those amazing behind the scenes work. And I'm just out there doing the liaison. And I think it's an important role for me being Indigenous. And in terms of data capture, previously they didn't have an Indigenous person in this role. So it would take time to go out and facilitate the right communication or right, discussion with the elders and whoever's the right person to talk to. And building trust. And so, I think I went in and got all my community done in sort of 1 or 2 afternoons, compared to what would take a few weeks.
Actually, Yarlalu, can I just, on a slightly side note, can I ask you, how has that idea of trust and your role out there in your community been with COVID? Have you had, what's been your experience with COVID and the COVID vaccines up in the Pilbara?
Yeah, again, a lot of it has to do with trust. And I think there was just a time period that went on for far too long where there wasn't proper communication from federal level about terms, in terms of COVID, but also the vaccination program. And that wasn't accessible to community. And if you speak English as your second or third language, it is almost impossible to understand the information that is available to you. So one project that I did do at the start of COVID was doing translation pieces about how to stay safe in the community, about washing your hands regularly, keeping that 1.5-2 meter distance from each other, and avoid traveling between communities, which is what a lot of Aboriginal people do. And we saw in the space of 48 hours that through Facebook and connections that I had at home and just sharing these posters around that it was across 4 different communities, translated in 2 other language groups, and just plastered all around town and places like Tom Price. So yeah, I think a lot of it does have to do with that. And the vaccination uptake recently, I spent my summer doing a few runs back home. And again, it's amazing to see the difference of people who were, unsure about getting the vaccine. And after having that discussion with me and the RFDS doctors that were in town in the community doing them, how quickly it was to, for them to realize.
You didn't have to deal with any 5G conspiracy theories or anything like that?
No, nothing like that. But
there was a lot of 5G.
But there was definitely, was there a bit of initial vaccine hesitancy, I guess, but just basically because of, is the main reason you said a lack of sort of translatable information about these things out? Yeah, right.
And it's all about communication. And if you're not told the facts, and you should, it's almost, a right in itself to know what you're going to be doing with your body in terms of health. And if you don't have that available, how can you make those decisions? So a lot of the other things that I do inside of Pilbara Faces and as well on the side of my studies is a program called Lyfe Languages, in which I'm translating like complex medical terminology into languages all across Australia.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So is that going to be kind of like a website available to people, or how will that be, I guess, distributed? So I guess you're just building up the database now, are you?
Our idea is, like, I've noticed it a lot with other communities, is that there's a lot of health projects and education and resource capacity building that are done across Australia, but a lot of them aren't sustainable, and you often see them being used for a few months, and then, technology these days and medicine these days is always changing. So what we see is that they sort of get used for a period of time and then forgotten about and then left there. And no one picks it up. So I guess it's just a way of putting that all together, but also breaking it down to its building blocks in terms of language. So a lot of the things that we're doing is, I mentioned before with phenotyping, there's an ontology called the human phenotype ontology terms. And this is used globally with geneticists. And it's just a way of better improving communication between each other, which offers ways of better diagnostics. But it also just, there's a mainstream pathway in terms of how you translate that back to your patients that you work with. So a lot of these terms are used in patient letters, for example, where your kid might have microcephaly. And I had a medical background before going into genetics, and I had no idea what that meant. And so if you add on those, issues of literacy in terms of people from community and not being able to understand that, it's just almost impossible to comprehend what's going on. So we've just started doing that and translating it and collecting this through a mobile application. So we've done about 300 terms in my local language. And then we've had a lot of interest from other communities as well, in other areas of health, so kidney health, type 2 diabetes. And what we realized is through our international connections is that this is a problem globally. And so we picked up, partnerships with people in Ghana, for example, with the Rare Genetic Disease team there, translating up to 7 different languages in that country alone. It's quite amazing to be a part of this and just hear these stories of, this isn't just a problem in Australia, it's everywhere.
I'm just wondering if you actually get any sleep, mate. Because it sounds like you got a lot on the go right now.
I do. I got an amazing team that I work with, and there's no way I'd be here without them.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
It's just incredible scope of stuff that you're doing. And I mean, our whole podcast, the Range Project, is really, what do you do?
We get to interview music people. Because I remember seeing you play the didge, I think at an assembly or something. Here, you still
many times. Yeah.
You doing any of that still, or you don't have time?
It's like playing the didge is like learning to ride a bike. Once you pick it up, you can, you remember it. But funny, I'm just reflecting on your question that I forgot to answer earlier in terms of, what was sort of a highlight of Scotch as well. I think, going through and doing pipe band was pretty amazing. And going back at home and showing people, this is me, this is what I'm doing. And what's that was the first question. Second question is, why are you wearing a skirt was usually followed up. But yeah, what I do for fun. I love to get out bush and back to country. And so having that opportunity to do a rural placement has just been, great to do that and connect back with family. And, after not doing it for so long, it's just, brings me a lot of happiness.
A really nice,
chuck a line in the water.
So it's a nice mix. You're getting a really nice balance at the moment.
Yeah, that's it. I think, having time off and just spending that day to yourself or around family is what gives me that R&R to get through the next week. So yeah.
There's some beautiful spots around Broome. Have you been up Cape Leveque?
Yeah, been up Cape Leveque. Going up there this coming long weekend, which would be good fun. So and
where
planning
are
to
you
hit the
staying?
Gib later in the year.
Yeah, what are your what are your favourite spots?
I like Minari, which is up sort of James Price Point area. And it's got lots of good fishing up that way. But for the Cape Leveque trip, we're going up to a family friend's place who own a pearling lease up there.
Signet Bay, is it?
Not Signet Bay, Arrow Pearls. Pearls.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
So I'm hoping to get a bit of fishing in as well.
Oh, it's fantastic fishing up there. It's unbelievable. Every cast you'll get something.
Yeah, exactly.
Table fish. Oysters are amazing as well.
Yeah,
we bring a nice thick knife with you and uncover some of those rocks. Bring some chili sauce.
Yeah, you're gonna show me all your spots then.
Yeah.
How to.
Mate, we've got about 10 minutes to go, and we've got a couple of quick fire questions we always save at the end for our guests. And
I've got another one I wanted to add as well.
Can
I jump in, or do you got something?
No, go for it.
I was going to ask you about your name, because I know a lot of people I know, they probably just name their kids after some movie character or something. But where does your name come from? I assume it's something more significant than that.
It is. It's a place in the Great Sandy Desert. where my grandfather was born, and it's a little hill and near a community called Midgegimaya, which is one that he set up, and where my dad grew up. But
Did you
yeah,
meet
he
him?
was pretty. Yeah, I met him. He died when I was around 4 or 5, so I didn't have that opportunity to grow up with him. But he was an amazing leader back in the community, and he was one of like the people who got involved in the 1946 Pilbara strike for our family.
What was life
And
like
that
for
was
him back in? So when was he born?
oh, well, he doesn't have a
We don't
birth record
not
or anything
entirely
like that.
sure.
No idea.
Roughly.
No
So
idea.
when did he die, and what kind of he was elderly, I assume. What he would have been. Was he? There wasn't much in the way of white people out there at that time. Were there
Yeah, so
stations?
he grew up out with his father, who was, they call him Big Sam, and he was 6'4", and I think that's where I got my height from, because my dad's really small. But yeah, he grew up out in the desert and walked in on station life, and sort of was involved with that at an early age. But he also married my grandmother, who she remembers telling me, and she's still around today, and she tells me stories about when she walked out of the desert, and she remembers seeing white people and white faces for the first time in camels.
Wow.
So it's quite amazing. I'm like reflecting on the fact that, you know, that was her growing up versus what I had back in Perth. It's just amazing to think in 2 generations time that's what's happened to Australia. But yeah, my grandfather was a hugely influential man. He's a big top law man. And when he worked on the station, you know, a lot of Aboriginal people back then, or all of them, were working for nothing but rations. So, you know, paid for the hard work of sugar, tea, bit of flour. And that was all they got. And if they decided to leave the station, a lot of the times they'd be pulled back by police, beaten on the way home, and told to go back to work. So yeah, it was him and a lot of people like Clancy McKenna and famous names like Dooley Bin Bin in the Pilbara area, that set up on Australia's longest strike, where all the Aboriginal people walked off to pastoral stations at the same time, and decided to strike. And over those years, they spent time yandying for tin and put the tin in jam jars, and they got paid by the jam jar. And they collected enough money to eventually buy back a few of the communities. And one of those communities was Warralong, which is where I'm from.
Wow, what a story.
Yeah. So it's great to have that connection with my name. And yeah, I just love thinking about him and wish he was still around.
Yeah.
Yeah, proud history.
Before we get to some of the final questions, I just want to ask, what do you want to achieve, you know, in the next 5 years? Are you hopeful about the next 5 years in health and medicine that we can make some, you know, great strides, especially up in supporting people in your community and surrounding communities?
Yeah. So I suppose my end goal in my lifetime is that I want to see like an Australia where there is no disparity in life expectancy between Indigenous people and our non-Indigenous counterparts. I think 10 years difference in a developed country is just ridiculous by all means. And to also see the gap widening in a lot of areas as well is quite concerning. So addressing these short-term things is what I want to do. But in terms of realistics, it's probably going to take longer than that. But if I can start a movement in which we're getting more people educated in the sense that they can walk away from university or walk into employment that can better contribute to the issues that each community faces, because everywhere is different. But to do that, I think it also stems from education. So, you know, involvement in organising ways in which our people can access that is something that I'll always be interested in. And it's going to take more than me to change this in the Pilbaras. And I'm certainly not going to be able to do it alone. So yeah, building up the capacity in that workforce is something that's so vital to do. And again, it all starts from opportunity. So
yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, well, that's a big goal to have, and yeah, we really, before we get to our final questions, we really hope that happens, sooner rather than later, and you get all the successes on your goals that you deserve, mate, because it's an amazing stuff that you're doing. So we're just in awe, actually.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, 3 quickfire questions for you, mate. This is the end. Thank you so much for spending some time with us and here at the Range Project. I'm sure this is going to go out to the whole Scotch community and we'll be showing it to lots of Scotch boys. So it'll be great. So thank you. Deserted Island, favorite album or favorite band? What would it be?
Oh, this is such a hard one. I'd have to probably go with the Johnny Cash classics.
Nice.
First CD I ever listened to from my granddad. So yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. What book or books have had the most profound effect on you? Is there any book you would recommend? Most.
I mean, I'm very medical focused in terms of what I read at the moment. So there's one book in particular that cracks me up, which is called House of God, which is a fictional book about the lifestyle of a junior doctor and where I'm going. And it's a bit of a fun, but
okay.
Yeah, I think it's that. But in terms of, leading up into Reconciliation Week, there's great books like When the West Was Lost and documentaries that you can read up on in terms of my culture. And if you're interested, I recommend that as well.
Awesome. What was the name of that one? Sorry.
How the West Was Lost is a doco that you can probably find online these days.
Yeah, How the West Was Lost.
My grandfather. Yeah, and it's a short doco about the strike.
Yeah. I was going to say I read an awesome, Stan Grant wrote an awesome essay in the Quarterly Essay, which is just a fantastic read. And he called it, I think it was he called it the Silent Revolution. And he was talking about how many, Indigenous people are off doing all sorts of different things now than they never were 20 years ago. And that's kind of happening somewhat under the radar of most Australians. They don't realise it, and said it's a great thing that a lot of progress is happening, even though there's lots of challenges. I don't know if you've read that one, but that was no,
I haven't. I should do that. But another comment about that is I noticed when I first got, into studying medicine, there's a lot of publicity from my local shire and town about going away to study medicine. And I just wish, it was amazing to have that support from your hometown. Don't get me wrong, but I sort of wished I lived in a time and society where that wasn't such a big thing.
Yeah.
Probably considered more of a normal thing, but yeah.
Okay, last one. What habit have you formed in the last 5 years that has been most beneficial to you?
Oh, hard one. I think growing up, I was quite stubborn, in the sense that you probably noticed this if you taught me back in the day, Sam. But
Year 10 English. Year 10 English.
Yeah, Year 10
you were
English.
Excellent.
That was it.
You were excellent. I don't know whether I was the best teacher, but you're a great student.
No, you're one of my favorite English teachers. Don't get that mixed up. But
thank you.
Yeah, I think it was a lot in terms of, and I still, I only sort of realized that this past 2 years going into a degree where, there's amazing learning opportunities all the time, and you are tested on your knowledge throughout the day by consultants, and there's times where you might not know it, or things that might get you frustrated. In terms of, you think you've done a really good job, but you can improve in these aspects. And I think it's just taking time to listen in a manner that you can then also self-reflect on later throughout the day and perhaps over a month. And so, I think that's something that I never did as a kid, and I was just always around the place. And something I only realize now is that self-reflection is just so important. So just take that time throughout the day, whether it's 10 to 20 minutes or over a weekend, to absorb what you've done and your actions throughout the weeks and how you can be a better you the next week.
Well, that is an awesome way to finish, mate. We are so grateful again for you coming on our show. You're obviously a man of great range, and there's just such an awesome bunch of things you're doing, and with such a great moral, cause and foundation to it all. And that's just fantastic. And we really appreciate your time, and we wish you all the best for your future and all the work you're doing now. And
we'll
thank you so much.
Down here.
Cheers. Thank you so much. And big shout out to the Scots community that's helped me go on this path that I am now, and I wouldn't be here without you. So thank you guys so much.
No worries.
Great.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Yarlalu.
All right.
Cheers.